What is compassion? That is a topic we are talking today about at the Captain's Corner, which is your place to get informed about first step to recovery and also to find out how we help here at Safe Harbor to create healthy and safe communities. Welcome to the Captain's Corner, Hans Jorgensen, our guest today.
Hello.
Hi, Hans. Hans is our Elders Helper. And of course, we have Kath Hoffman here, our captain. Hi, Kath.
Ahoy there, mateys.
And I'm Kirsten, and I am your host today. And as mentioned, today we are talking about compassion, which is an amazing topic because compassion is also one of our 7 stars. And I would love to, for you, Hans, to quickly introduce yourself, briefly just say what you do at the Harbour, and then we want to know all about compassion and why and how it came to be that you are at the Harbour, because it's a super interesting story.
Sure. So hello, everybody. My name is Hans. I am the Escapios, which is the Indigenous word for Elders Helper or Indigenous Elders Helper. At the Harbour, part of my role is to lead Indigenous 12-step addiction recovery meetings. So I do it for our in-house detox guests. I do meetings for the community members and also at the local remand jail.
And that's Wellbriety.
Yeah, that's what we call Wellbriety. So you would think about, say, AA or NA, but what we do with those is we take the same steps that's found in AA or NA, and we combine it with Indigenous teachings called the medicine wheel teachings.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So
and how long have you been at the Harbour?
Yeah, go right in.
Yeah, I've been at the Harbour since, I think it was June. Yeah, last June. So not this past June, but a year ago, June. And I actually started off on the shelter side. I was working on the shelter as a casual for the first few months. And then Lynn, the elder in our Many Healing Blankets program, poached me to go work at the jail for him, and then brought me on basically as a full-time position into the Many Healing Blankets program department. So
awesome.
And Hans, what drew you to the shelter?
Well, I was a Franciscan for 28 years, Franciscan monk and Buddhist practitioner for 20 years.
Yeah. Yes.
What? You were a monk?
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, still considered one. I still have, still my vows and stuff. But yeah, so I practiced as a Franciscan friar, which is a type of monk, and as a Buddhist practitioner, Tibetan Buddhist practitioner for 28 years before I came to the Harbour. So,
and you started that journey at how old were you?
Yeah, I was 12 when I started my journey.
Wow.
As a monk. I took my first set of vows with the Franciscan tradition when I was 12 years old.
Hang on, and sorry, here, like in Red Deer or where?
No, in Europe, in Germany.
Oh.
Yeah, and then later on, branched out and took some vows as a monk with the Buddhist tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, when I was around 20 years old. And that's really where the whole compassion journey kind of started for me in a whole different direction. Kind of deepening my understanding of compassion was really more with the Tibetan Buddhist tradition more than anything. So, and that's largely what I'll speak from my perspective anyways, from the Tibetan tradition of that. So
wow.
Isn't that so cool? Like, he was 12 years old, Kirsten, and he said, I'm going to go and do this. I said to him, a 12-year-old has that in him. Like, it was such a calling for him.
So hang on. So are you actually German?
My family's Danish. So my father's side is Danish, and then my mother's side is Cree, mixed Cree, so they'd be classified as Métis. Yeah. Okay. So the first monk that I had studied under was named Father Eckel. He was an 85-year-old monk at the time, and it just kind of by happenstance we met, and I was enamored by him and his teachings and his way of life. And he was more or less a hermit at the time. He wasn't really in active practice out in the community like most Franciscans were, but he took me under his wing, and I got to take my first set of vows and study for several years under him. So.
Wow. So can I ask you, like, did this like with 12 years old? I'm just thinking of my daughter who was 12. Like what, like how did that happen? Like, did it just come over you like in a dream? Like, did you feel like this inner pull of like what? Like, did you get a
How do you
vision?
even know about monks?
Yeah, and that.
Well, I actually didn't know anything about monks, and we weren't raised really in any, extreme religious upbringing by any means. One side of the family was Lutheran, the other side was Catholic. Which is a fairly typical for a lot of people, even in Canada and in Europe, of course. But when I was 12, I guess you could say that inner awakening, something stirred inside, and so I had a curiosity about. I'll use the word creator to kind of reference more to the Indigenous perspective of things. So something inside wanted me to know more about the creator, the great mystery of life, as we like to call it, the great spirit. And so I just started talking to anybody who could give me answers. And that could have been the Jehovah's Witness that came to the door, or the local priest on Sunday, or whatever that was. You just kind of go wherever. And by happen chance, I met some people at a like a kind of like a flea market type thing. I don't know what you would call, I think that's what you call them here, a flea market.
Yeah.
And they were selling Bibles and different religious stuff, and I got talking to them, and I kept on going back every weekend to talk to them more and more. And they said, well, we know somebody who we think you would really enjoy talking to, and it was this Father Eccles. So we got connected.
Cool.
And I spent a night with him once, and an evening with him and some other people, and then went back for a 3-day retreat, and then it was just kind of downhill from there. In a good downhill, so to speak. Yeah, I was hooked, and it really was there was just something about how he expressed the creator, his version of the creator, so to speak.
And it
that
fits you.
really, that I really enjoyed, and still to this day, I still really like how the Franciscans express their form of spiritual practice, so. Yeah.
So was there like something compassionate that was, awakened in you while doing that as well? Like, or yeah.
Well, I think the compassion part actually came, unfortunately, a little later. I had spent, 8 years in that tradition, working with different youth organizations. As I was ordained by the time I was 18, I had my ordination, so I could go out and practice as what they call a brother. So your first level of ordination. And so I was working a lot with the youth, and a lot of in the closet LGBTQ youth started coming out at this time, and it triggered my own questioning that I had had for several years. But I'm a celibate monk, so what do you do? What does it matter whether you're LGBTQ or not, right? It just didn't matter, or at least I thought it didn't matter, until I had to really start to question that myself. And as I went on my own questioning journey, a lot of painful experiences happened. It wasn't about breaking vows or anything. I didn't leave that life. It was just questioning it and talking. And basically it all came to a breaking point where I was kicked out of the church. I had my at the time anyways, the organization I was working with, I was excommunicated essentially. And that caused a deep pain, real intense pain. And, I felt abandoned by God, so to speak. I felt abandoned by the church, by people. It was very painful, dark time for about 6 months. And then I met a Tibetan Buddhist, and I shared my story. And the Buddhist was actually in Calgary, of all places. I had met this Tibetan Buddhist, and shared with him my experience of the pain of the rejection from the community and the church, and how it was just all handled. And he talked to me about compassion, and I was hooked. I was like, well, I got to know more. Not that we didn't have compassionate teachings in the Franciscan church, because obviously we did, but it was the way that the Buddhists had expressed it and how they held space for me as I was trying to figure things out. And I took a long time and a lot of refuge time, to the point where I took my vows with them as a bodhisattva, which is a compassionate word. That's one of the terms we use. And then then except 28 years later, well, 30 years later now, but I've been continuing to practice ever since, basically because of how they explained compassion to me. It was hooked right away by that.
And Hans, do you think, because there you were in that deep place of hurt, and I totally get what you're saying about the fact that it wasn't that Franciscans didn't have compassion in their teachings and stuff, but that deep place of hurt then forced you, if you will, to find that compassion for yourself, not for other people, you know?
Yeah.
That spiritual practice of helping others, you were aching for it internally yourself. And then I always find that's how I learn best, by heart and through those dark places, right? That's interesting.
If you don't mind, I'll share the short little teaching that they gave me, because it actually relates to what you were just saying, Kath. So this is the very first teaching I ever heard on compassion. This is by Pema Chodron, who's still my primary Buddhist teacher. She says that compassion is knowing our darkness well enough that we can sit in the dark with others. It is never a relationship between the wounded and the healed. It is a relationship between equals. No one reaches out to you for compassion or empathy so you can teach them how to behave better. They reach out to you, reach out to us because they believe in our capacity to know our own darkness well enough to sit in the dark with them.
Yeah.
And then there's a second part
cool.
that she goes on, and this is a short little part. It says, only to the degree that we've gotten to know our own personal pain, only to the degree that we related to pain at all, will we be fearless enough, brave enough, and enough of a warrior to be willing to feel the pain of others. To that degree, we will be able to take the pain of others because we have discovered that their pain and our pain are not different.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know, she's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love her books. For anybody that's looking for more information on that, her name is spelled Pema, and then her last name is CHO, right?
Yep.
DON or
DRON.
CHON, right?
DRON. Pema Chodron. Yeah. Sometimes they put the little umlauts over the O's, but you can search it in English spelling, it'll come up.
Yeah, she's a cool chick.
Yeah.
That really fits. And so there you are. Okay, now you're doing Tibetan stuff, and you found out about this compassion, and you received some of it.
Yeah.
And then what?
Then it's been in a lot of ways a really messy spiritual journey for myself, a messy path where a lot of failure, a lot of mistakes, a lot of amends, to take a page from the 12-step tradition, a lot of amends over the years. But the more I worked with the compassion, the more I was able to hold more loving space for myself. In the Buddhist tradition, we call it Maitri, which is loving kindness or unconditional friendliness towards oneself. So that's what I've done over the years, is taught that a lot. It's been my primary teaching, oh gosh, for at least 15 years now, as I've learned, kind of to sit with that now and to move forward. So I've worked in different organizations over the years, had different ministries of my own, different practices, healing practices of my own over the years. And the last one was in Redding, California. That's where I was before I came to the Harbour. I was down there for a year, and it was right around the fires, when they had the fires in 2018, 2019. I was down there working with a lot of people down there. And I started working a lot with addiction down there. A lot of people have, the various forms of addiction, not necessarily super strong active addictions, but, addiction in all forms that really take us over. And so I would teach that compassion, that compassion is really just sitting with it, not trying to fix anything, but just give people space. Don't make them wrong. Don't move to try to change them or heal them or anything. Just hold them space. And then that time ended, and I came up to Canada, and then the pandemic hit. So I sat around for a better part of a year and a half, looking for work, and eventually found myself at the Harbour. So.
And Hans, I, when I developed those 7 stars, or really, I just put the words down. The Harbour developed those 7 stars. The compassion one suggests that we're going to be compassionate to the people we serve. Okay. That's the assumption of the, but I found out, like I always do, that it means much more than that. and how it challenges me. Okay. So I say, okay, we've got this compassion star. Everybody has to be compassionate. That's the rule. Captain's orders. Everybody has to be compassionate. And then I'll have someone who's not a client, maybe an angry neighbor or business person, or someone who's really frightened by the issues that we have. And they will just hammer me with whatever, right?
Yeah.
And there is my challenge. Okay. There's a damn compassion star says, okay, Hoffman, guess what? It means this too. Can you be compassionate when you don't want to be? You know, that's when I get challenged, because I want to be mad. I want to be righteous. I want to have indignation, and, you know, the humanness in me wants all those things, right? But that's when I get challenged. I never get challenged, but it seems, by the people who serve or my staff. But I get challenged with, I want to say, the ignorance and the ugly, you know. I just get so tired of it. And sometimes it's really hard to remind myself that I have to do that, right? But I do have to do it, because anything else doesn't work. Like, what am I going to do? Say something back? Like, duh. And and I have to, you know, really look at that person. And that's when I started to listen to what people were saying, like really listen, and then trying to find out what was behind that. So I could talk differently, or, you know, look for a nugget, look for a story that might make a difference, you know, compared to, listen, you know. And yeah, like everything, those ones we learn by heart, you know, because that threatens me when people do that. I get threatened because I think you guys are really noisy. You're going to shut down our service. We're going to have all these people and with nothing, you know, and blah, 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 blah. So fear is a good teacher. And it's always a good reminder for me when I feel that way, to remember that compassion star doesn't just mean what it was first intended for. Right. You know, it's interesting. So how do you do it? How do you be compassionate when you don't want to be?
Well, the reality is sometimes it just shows up as, like you said, anger, righteousness, indignation in the moment. And so sometimes it's the aftermath, you know, when the dust has settled, so to speak, that I have to realize, oh, okay.
Yeah.
They're triggered. I'm triggered. Yeah. So there's still a point of pain.
Yes.
So sometimes it's actually, I would say a lot of the time, it's the after part that I have to work with. Yeah. You know, I can say a prayer for them, so to speak. I can understand that they're feeling threatened. They're feeling afraid. They're feeling fear. And also they don't want to touch their own pain. Yeah. You know, everybody has empathy in the sense that if I tell you a difficult story about myself, you either move towards or you move away. Yeah. And we're doing that because of empathy, because we can feel it. So you know, somebody starts crying, we feel uncomfortable, we don't know what to do. We either move towards trying to fix it, or we move away and say, I can't do anything about this. And sometimes our pain is so strong within that we haven't sat with, as that quote says, sitting with our own darkness well enough to know it, that we just, you know, we become very defensive. Yeah. So a lot of times it's not necessarily in the moment, because I'm triggered just like every other human being on the planet, but it's the after that I can think.
Good point.
You know, okay, what can I do now? Right? Can I say a prayer for them? Can I meditate? There's a technique we call Tonglen meditation, where we breathe in their pain and we send out a relief. You know, so I can do that for them afterwards, which is considered an act of compassion. Yeah. And yet it's just understanding people are hurt. They're wounded.
Yeah.
You know, deeply wounded people.
Well, and you're so right about that after part, because that's always what happens, you know. And, you know, if I've been fortunate enough to keep my mouth shut and just, you know, be reflective later, it's those, every time I have that awareness, just helps me respond better the next time it happens, you know. Yeah. And that's the beauty of awareness. And you know, you can't change what you don't acknowledge, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Isn't he cool? Kirsten, I told you, Hans. Is gonna be a really cool
I'm
guy.
speechless.
I know.
I still don't know how it came that you from Germany to the States or to Canada. Like what was
I have family in Europe, so that's my father is Danish. He still lives there.
Yeah.
So most of my Danish side of the family is over there, and where they live is about 4 kilometers from Germany. So it's not a hard little trek to go back and forth, so to speak. But yeah, the friars are nomadic. You know, part of the
I
thing,
didn't know that.
Yeah, friars aren't cloistered. Like if you had a Benedictine monk or a Trappist, some of these other names you may have heard, they're cloistered, so they stay in a monastery, for pretty much their entire vocation. Whereas a Franciscan doesn't really have a monastery. We serve in the community. So think more like Mother Teresa style, if that it was a reference that makes sense, where she's out in the community doing work. So that's how the friars work. And the particular group that I was ordained through and taught with was basically, somehow we joke and we call ourselves pilgrim monks. It was kind of a little joke we had, because we're always wandering, and it worked really well because I'm a very nomadic person by nature. Whether trauma informed or healthy informed, either way, I ended up being very nomadic. So I think that's why it worked for me. So I would just kind of move around to the communities that I felt there was a need for, or maybe I was running, but either way, I found things to do. That's a reality we have to accept, is it's a bit of both, right? And trying to escape my pain and help others. The codependent nature starts to kick in, So so there's just a lot of wandering because opportunities came up.
And then you wandered across the big pond to Canada?
Well, because I was born in Canada, so I'm from here. Yes. Clarification there.
Yes. Okay. Good.
But because I have family over there, there was this back and forth. My mother was very sick a lot when I was a kid, so I was often raised by grandparents on both sides. So that's why there's a connection to both sides of the pond, so to speak. And connection to the States is I've met so many people in the US who came up to Canada and was invited down there. And so I've lived down there several times now for a short period, up to a year, 2 years at a time, different communities. So.
So at the beginning of our chat today, we talked about that there are different interpretations of compassion. So we just mentioned like sitting in the dark with them and feeling like their pain and our own journey. Like what other interpretations have you maybe come across since you have been working with the Harbour or on your journey?
Well, a lot of people seem to talk about compassion in the way that we would talk about kindness, or maybe the word loving kindness. Compassion isn't really something we do per se. It's more of a space that we hold for other people. So often people say, oh, they're very compassionate, but really what they're saying is they're really kind, they're really generous, they're very merciful. And these are other really incredible, powerful virtues, very healing, good medicine, as we would say in Native communities. It's good medicine. But it's just to understand the distinction that whereas loving kindness is more of the act of doing something, literally what they do at the shelter is an act of loving kindness, where you take people in, you serve them. In many ways, you just hold space for them to berate you, to yell at you, all these things that can happen at the shelter. And then the good things, where somebody thanks you because they have a place to sleep at night. That's an act of kindness. Whereas compassion is kind of the prelude almost to that. It's like, I hear you and I'm feeling that with you. I'm in that space with you as you're feeling pain, discomfort, the experience of suffering. I'm just holding space. You're not alone in that, And then we move with kindness is the act that we do for them. How can I do something for you that relieves the pain? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. Very much.
And then things like mercy, for example, is Anne Lamott, who's this wonderful author. She says that mercy is radical kindness or radical forgiveness. It's the extreme that we give mercy to somebody who doesn't deserve it, who doesn't deserve kindness, who doesn't deserve being forgiven, but we do it anyway, and that's mercy. So they're similar, They're in the same realms, but they are distinct things that when all put together, we get this phenomenal medicine, this alchemy.
They're all those threads on a web.
Yeah. It's just distinguishing that they have their own components, but you put them together and you have a phenomenal medicine, really powerful medicine for people.
Now, you know what else I want to find out from you, Jorgensen, is at Safe Harbor. Here we are with our non-Indigenous organization offering an Indigenous program for the last 15 years or so, right? And our journey and transition and merging as best we could these two cultures to find a place to be. For you personally, when you have your Franciscan monk thing, I shouldn't say thing, that
Sure, that's fine.
When you have your Franciscan monk adventure, and then you have your Tibetan Buddhist adventure, and then you pop into the Harbour, into the Indigenous culture, this is medicine that's whoa, right? How have you found personally merging all of that as you're loving it, loving people as you go? How's that been for you?
I would say for the most part, it's been really good. I mean, there's been challenges, but the merging is actually pretty easy for me. And the reason why is I don't really see a lot of differences between so Franciscan is considered to be a mystical branch of Christianity, and then the Tibetan is very much an indigenous based type of Buddhism. So I just look for where are the similarities, where do they blend, where do they, for example, in indigenous culture, we talk about the medicine wheel. In the Buddhist tradition, they say the Dharma wheel, right? So it's like you can put one word over top of the other and it would fit, even though it's a different word. So there's a lot of similarities. In the meetings, I'll often talk about, in Buddhism, we say the wheel of samsara, which is the wheel of suffering. And I say, you're on this wheel of suffering. It's like a hamster wheel, keeps on spinning, you can't get off. So now we're asking you to get onto the medicine wheel, something again that turns life in a different way. But so there's a lot of comparisons, there's a lot of similarities. And from a Franciscan point of view, a lot of people don't know this, but Saint Francis was considered to be the patron saint of nature. He had a real deep, intimate connection with nature. And I think a lot of Native Americans can appreciate that aspect of it anyway. Maybe not everything, and I understand because of the issues with church and residential school. There's a lot of pain there for sure. But Saint Francis was often known for calling the moon his brother and the sun his brother. He would refer to them as a brother and sister. He was often known for, or at least said, I mean, these are all mythologies, so we don't know because we weren't there, but he was said to have slept with the animals at night, that the wolves would come and sleep with him and keep him warm at night. And whether it's mythology or not, it's a cool story. That he had this intimate connection with Grandmother Earth, that he really understood harmony with nature and how the creator was found in all parts of nature. He would often say that the scriptures were originally written on the leaves of the trees. So there's a lot of these things that you can pull in, right? That I like the Native American word wakantanka, which means the great mystery. If we leave it as a mystery, that we're not here to define or box it in, then I think we can pull from the four directions. And that's another thing with the medicine wheel, we have four directions, four races, four cultures. So Tibetan Buddhism brings in the direction from the yellow nation. We have the red nation from the Native Americans, we have the black nation, we have the white nation, which the Franciscans could offer some wisdom to. Not to take anything over, but just to add, in addition to, always in addition to. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's a really good answer.
Okay.
I've always responded best, or what fits me best is that idea that there's not just one way. There's never just one way. And, I've always, years ago when I was running a recovery house in Drumheller with a group of 11 men who were in some ways like adolescent boys, and they needed to get out. I knew these boys need to get outside and play. They need to go build a fort or something. Like they're just rambunctious today or whatever, right? And I've always known that what very often we say we have to get back to nature, as though we're separate from it. We have to go find nature. We forget that we are nature ourselves. And I think that everybody who, when they go camping, when they go to the mountains, when they go fishing, when they're going whatever, when they're telling those stories about their experiences out there, if you will, they're always meaningful, like there is a deep, deep connection. And the way we talk about it, sometimes it's like we're different than that. We're different than nature. We're different, we're humans. We're the ultimate,
separate.
We're separate, right? And so, I always appreciate that. Mark Twain is one of my guys that I love to read his stuff, man. And he was there way back then, like, and in a time that was, and in an environment that was totally biblical Christian doctrine, like, but I always think, how come you were thinking outside that box? Mark Twain? Like as though, we in this generation have all the insights and the wisdoms. Like, I don't know why I'm always surprised by that, but I always am. I think, oh, those guys knew that back then. Well, of course they did. They probably knew it better than we did. We've been so far removed and our culture is so disconnected that they probably had a way better understanding. Yeah. It's cool, man. I really, I love that kind of talk, and I love that way of thinking. And we're really blessed to have Hans come. Kirsten, you always hear me say, like, when we need something at the Harbour, we get it, and sometimes we don't even know we need it. But Hans certainly is one of those people shining those really bright lights, and the versatility that you have, and the openness, to find for yourself and to share with everybody else, that the diversity and like you said, what's the commonality in all of this? And I think, when it fits us best, that common thing is love. Right. It's cool. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hans, for joining us today. Is there anything that you, I don't know, would like to share that we haven't touched on today?
Well, there's something that, maybe one or two things briefly here. The one thing is to really understand that this is another quote by Pema Chodron that I heard only recently, actually, and it really hit me, because working at the Harbour can be challenging sometimes. It can, and same with the jail. You're working with very wounded people, people who have a lot of pain, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and she said this quote, and it just hit me. She says, compassion really hurts because you can't fix a lot of things. And when I heard that, it was like, oh, because that part of and you've seen this, Kath, I know you have, where people burn out. And in spiritual communities, we call this compassion fatigue or altruistic burnout. Sometimes they'll use either term. And it's because we're often trying to do more than what the Creator has asked us to do. This is something we bring up in the 12-step groups all the time, in the realms of codependency. Codependents are oftentimes healers. They're the guardian angels in human form. They're the healers in human form, so to speak. And so you're working with these wounded people all the time, and your heart aches for them. You want to do more, because we've sat with our pain too. Those of us who really sat with our pain, we really want to relieve their pain. But to know that compassion hurts because it can't fix a lot of things is a difficult thing to just sit with. I remember many times at the shelter, people would ask for a pair of shoes, and you'd look down and they're in bare feet that are very dark and sometimes scratched up and, whatever, and it could be cold outside, and you don't have shoes. And it hurts because you can't do anything for them. You want to, but you can't. Like, you think, okay, can I give them my shoes? So you have to hold that space. And that's one thing we have to just realize, that sometimes there's nothing else you can do but just hold space. you know.
And you are so right that that's so hard.
Yeah, yeah. And we
I really
out.
find, oh, go ahead.
No, go, I'm done. Yeah, sorry.
Where I find it in my work, Hans, like great analogy with the shelter. In my world, it's with the systems, you know, and I have staff and my partner agencies and everybody that are aching for resources. Like, you know, so you see the need, you're hit by the need every day, all day. And you can't, you know, I remember like years ago, we're a harm reduction agency. We said we meet people where they're at, right? But what if they tell us where they're at? And then we say, oh, there's no funding for that. There's no funding for that. There's nowhere for you. There's nowhere. And how that weighs on you and weighs on you. And when I went to the conference, the Wild Variety Conference, and I listened to Don Coyas's talk at the end, and he was talking about being a coyote like I am. And he was saying how this coyotes go in there and just get it done. And I, thank gosh, Daryl Lickers was sitting beside me. Yep. I just started crying. And Terry was there and I was just crying and crying. And I did like this, like that kind, right? At the table, I was just crying. And I thought, oh my gosh, like it was that exactly what you described. It was that feeling like, okay, I'm supposed, you know, but that acceptance, that's what I had trouble with, that I have to accept that there's only that much I can do, that my team has to accept that, and that we have to accept the risk of serving the people that we're serving. Because right now we're all, you know, really worried about our safety, safety of everybody, right? And you have to accept it. And that's so hard. So hard and heavy. And I like, those tears were just like, right? I was like, oh my, Daryl was just hanging on to my hand. I was like, oh, thank you. I never knew it was there. And it just was, it was all of that. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
The option is to do nothing. And we can't do that. It's not an option.
Yeah. You know, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we would say that you are on the path of what we call a bodhisattva warrior. And and I really like the term because this is another word that merges well with Native American concepts of warrior. You know, in the Wild Variety, we'll often refer to as a peaceful warrior. And in the Buddhist tradition, we say a compassionate warrior or a bodhisattva warrior. That's roughly the translation. And it's this idea that we are committed to going down. You know, we always look at a spiritual path as going up, that you go up a mountain, that's about transcendence. But in this tradition, it's about you go down and you go into the dark places and you keep on going further and further down. And you go at a pace that you can. You know, it's not about rushing. It's not about trying to get to the end of the race quicker than anybody. It's just that you keep on moving down.
Yeah.
You know, and it's different because most of society is trying to move away. You know, we see that all the time. And not because they actually aren't kind people, but again, it goes back to that, you know, they're not dealing with their own discomfort. We're not trained on how do you live and sit with uncomfortability.
Yeah.
You know, we always trying to escape uncomfortable. Right? I mean, that's addiction, right?
Yeah, it's addiction. Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable with who I am, my experiences, my environment, whatever that is, and I'm going to numb out, or try to numb out, try to escape that, right?
Yeah.
And so when we don't like something, what do? We remove it. Yeah. If we can't remove it, we numb out to it. And so we either control it, manipulate it, or numb out to it. Yeah. And that's essentially what society. I remember seeing that in Vancouver when I lived in Vancouver.
Yes.
Around the Hastings Street, and as it would start to leak into some of the more affluent communities and around there, people would start to complain. And I would say, well, they've been here for 30 years. What did you think was going to happen because you bought a condo there? You know?
Yeah.
The problem doesn't go away because we just want to, close our eyes. Right. So it's difficult for them and it's difficult for us.
Yeah.
You know, but I think of people like you, Kath, and certainly people like myself, as we've made, whether formally or informally, we've made a commitment to the world in a certain way. And that's what the Buddhists would call a bodhisattva. You know,
what's it called again?
A bodhisattva. Bodhisattva. Yeah. It's a being that commits to helping the world release suffering, to be free of their suffering. That's the most basic way. And you and I are doing it with the homeless, with the addicts, with the criminals. One of my favorite positions with the Harbour is working at the jail.
Yeah.
I love working with the criminals, hearing their stories and reminding them that you are not your crime.
Yeah.
You've created a crime. You're not a criminal. But you've created a crime. There's a distinction there,
Yeah.
You have an addiction. You're not an addict. There's a distinction,
Exactly.
It reminds them that you're still a human being. You just happen to have an addiction.
Yeah.
You're a human being. You just happen to create a crime, It's not the truth about you. It's just a behavior that you've done, that you've acted out on, And we got to remember that about people,
Yes, we do.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Right on, Hans. You're so cool, man.
Yes. I could sit and talk with you like all day.
I know.
And listen to you all day. Like, this is so
Thank
cool.
you. Appreciate that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So thank you, Hans, again for joining us today. That was amazing. Okay. And so if everyone who's listening today has any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and we will get back to you. If you have any specific questions for Hans, please put them as well in the chat, and we will direct them to him.
Thank you.
And so thank you, Hans. And Cass, I will leave the last words up to you as always.
Steady as she goes.
Steady as she goes. Thank you.
Thanks, Hans.
Bye.